So we've got our main flow, our main logic. The next thing we want to do is look at this API gateway. Let's start by looking at what an API gateway is. So in simple words, an API gateway is a server that acts as an entry point for client requests and routes them to backend services. It acts as a reverse proxy, handling authentication, request transformation, rate limiting, and also other operations, but these are the main ones. API gateway brings a lot of benefits to microservices architectures. It offers a centralized entry point for clients. We can use it as a load balancer and to determine routing. It is also used for security and performance optimization, along with API versioning, monitoring, and protocol translation. All of this sounds good, but there are also some drawbacks. For example, this introduces a single point of failure. It increases latency as we have an extra step to go through. Having an API gateway service also increases complexity in setup and maintenance. And there is also the possibility for a potential bottleneck, as all requests will be hitting API gateway. But that's not a big issue because we can simply scale horizontally by adding more instances. In this video, we will be using Spring Cloud Gateway, but before that, let's have a look at few diagrams to better understand what we're trying to achieve. In this diagram, you can see that we have an API gateway, but you might have noticed that using Postman, we're calling directly booking service and inventory service. And that's because we still need to build this API gateway. So let's see how that's going to work. On the left, we have the current way we are using booking service and inventory service. We are using Postman to directly call these two services. What we want to achieve is this one on the right. We want to be able to call API gateway, and then API gateway will route our requests to either booking service or inventory service. Right now, when we want to call booking service, we send a request using Postman with the full URL of what we want to call. And this URL is the same as the one defined in the controller in the booking service. And the same is true for inventory service. But let's say we wanted to change our inventory service to a warehouse service. Let's say we wanted to change its name because the way it functions is going to change. Or we want to substitute inventory service with a brand new service called warehouse service. In that case, our client will need to be calling this new endpoint, and we will have to do changes in Postman to support this. So just imagine you have thousands of clients that are relying on your API. You don't want this to happen. You don't want to go through the hassle of having your clients change all their endpoints if they were using your service. So for example, you could have 10 endpoints. You don't want to go and tell your clients to change all these endpoints. That's where API gateway comes in hand. If we were to introduce an API gateway, this is how the request forwarding would look like. So API gateway would have its own mappings of the backend services. The client will be still calling the inventory endpoint, but just notice we will be calling port 8090 in this example, which is the port of our API gateway. And then API gateway knows where to route the request. Let's say we want to call this endpoint to get inventory. Our client will send it to the gateway. API gateway knows that in the background, we now want to call our warehouse service. When the request hits API gateway, it will be transformed and it will be sent to the actual service, in this case, the warehouse service. So here is a graphical example of what I just described. Inventory service is not available anymore, or we have decided to deprecate it, and we now want to use this warehouse service. Our client will be unchanged. The only thing that will change is the mapping in the API gateway to call warehouse service instead of inventory service. We are now ready to write some code. API gateway is going to be another service in our architecture. So go on Spring Initializer and let's create another Spring Boot project. Again, I will be using Java with Maven. I'll be using the latest Spring Boot version 3.4.3, and I'll be using Java 21. Give it a name and let's add the dependency. We want to use the first one, which is called Gateway. Let's add it, and that's all we need. Let's generate, and let's open this project in IntelliJ. I have opened our project. We want to add routing information into our API gateway application. So let's start by creating a package. Let's call it route. And now let's create a class called inventory service routes. Also, let's create booking service routes. You might be wondering, why don't we have an order service routes? And that's because order service does not have an external API endpoint. So we cannot call it. Even booking service does not call order service directly. We go through a queue. So we just need inventory service routes and booking service routes. Let's start by looking at how a route looks like. So this is a configuration class. You want to add this tag. And next we want to create a bean, and it's going to be a public router function that returns a server response. Let's import that, and this is going to be called booking routes. So I wanted to start with booking service as it's the easiest one between the two. Inventory service has more endpoints. Here you want to add the actual route. We're going to return a gateway router functions dot route. Let's give it a name. So the route ID is booking service. And let's define the actual route. The request will come to this endpoint here, and it is a post request. This looks correct. Let's build, and give me a moment, I'll explain what I've written. The external route is this one, API v1 booking. So whenever a post request comes on this route to API gateway, we want to forward this request to this endpoint, localhost 8081 API v1 booking. Let me just show you what this is. This is the same request path we have defined in our booking service, API v1, and a post request on the path booking. So simply what's going to happen is we will be calling API gateway on this endpoint, and it will be routed to this one. You can even call this book tickets, or you can give it other names, and that's the beauty of using an API gateway. It makes it easier to handle API requests. But I will just change it back to booking. So we've got the routes for our booking service. Let's also add a couple of routes for inventory service. So this is a bean, so it will be the same as before. It's going to be a router function response inventory routes. So we want to do something similar to what we did before. So we're going to return a gateway router functions dot route. We want to give it a route ID. We'll call it inventory service. And now we want to define the route. So let's have a quick look at inventory service first. We are just going to be defining these two routes, just to give you an example of defining multiple routes for the same service. But as you can see, we have a path variable, and this is where we need to do things a bit differently compared to the booking service routes. So let me just show you. Let's go back to our API gateway, and here we're going to be adding these 2 lines, actually 4 lines. I'll just copy and paste. It's gonna be easier to explain. And we need also a helper function, and then .build, and this should be all we need. So what have we done? Same as before, we had defined the path that we will be calling in API gateway, which is this one. And we want to forward this request onto this URL. As you can see, this is the inventory service URL. But the different thing is we need to handle the path variable. And to handle the path variable, I had to create this helper function. It's quite easy to understand. We are basically just going to get the path variable from the server request, and then we're going to create this handler function. Quite simple. If you wanted to add a new route for inventory service, you can just add the route and do the same as above. But I'm just going to add these 2. The last thing left to do is simply to add a port where this API gateway will be running. So I will be running it on 8090. Let's add a configuration. Call it API gateway. Main class, just select it. Click apply, OK. By the way, before just running that, I wanted to add that we can do this nicely as well. Instead of having the base URL hard-coded, just add it in the application.properties, and then using the value tag, just import it in this configuration class. One thing we forgot is to add the configuration tag to inventory service routes. We already have it on booking service routes. So we are now ready to run this. You want to make sure that the services in the Docker Compose are running. And then let's start up inventory service. This has started successfully. Let's run booking service. This has started successfully as well. And let's run order service. This has started as well. And now let's start up our API gateway. This has started as well on port 8090. Now, using Postman, we want to make sure that we can still create bookings, but instead of using booking service, we want to go through API gateway. So let's change this port number to go through API gateway and make it 8090. We can leave the body the same. Let's click send. And as you can see, this was sent. We have a 200. And let's see if we can call inventory service endpoints using API gateway. So let's change the port to 8090 and let's see if the capacity has decreased by 300 because we just did a new booking. It has decreased by, 30. We booked 30 tickets. Let's say we want to book 50 tickets. Let's send. Query the inventory and we can see it has decreased by 50. So as you can see, our API gateway is working. The next step is to protect our backend service. We don't want anyone to be able to just call our backend service. So I'll show you how to add some kind of authentication on our endpoint.